All right, thanks everyone. Our next panel is The Power of Intelligence, the Role of AI in Shaping the Future of Energy. We have Betsy Soehren Jones, Managing Director of Energy and Utilities at West Monroe. We have Kenath Carver, Director of Compliance Assessments at Texas Reliability Entity. We have KJ Haugen, founder of Haugen Labs. I'll slow down a little.
Getting wired up.
We're good. We have Dr. Dan Stanzione, Executive Director of the Texas Advanced Computing Center, otherwise known as TACC, here at UT Austin. And there we go. Now I'm confused. Did I miss someone? We got all four of you, right?
Yep.
Thanks.
Well, good morning, everyone. We are very excited to bring this panel to you. Before we open up and give our introductions, from a level-setting perspective, this panel really is about AI in the energy space. And when you talk about AI in energy, there's really two parts of that equation. The first is, if you look at AI uses an incredible amount of energy just to run. It's one of the highest energy consumption when you think about customers from a customer perspective. Data centers are using more power at or above the same amount of power that your old steel mills used to use. So as an industry, it's something that we're really grappling with, is how much and how quickly do we need to bring that load into the US, onto the grid, et cetera. So that's one aspect of it. And then the second aspect is really the technology itself and how are energy companies starting to use that technology on a day-to-day basis. So when we're setting up this panel, we wanted to make sure that we covered both sides of that equation, not only the energy usage side, but then also the technical side. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to each of my fellow panelists to introduce themselves, and then I will go last and we'll start the questions. So with that, KJ.
Thank you, Betsy. Yeah, so my name is Kjetil Haugen. I have quite a bit of experience from the oil and gas industry. I spent 12 years with ExxonMobil. My primary focus was on mathematical modeling and simulation. And then a few years ago, I left and went to the tech industry, worked with AMD, got kind of swooped out in the AI craze within AMD, but still focusing on physics-based simulations and the use of AI in that context. And recently, I decided to form my own company to kind of bridge the gap between those two industries.
Hey all, I'm Dan Stanzione. Saw some of you at a panel here on Tuesday. I'm Associate Vice President for Research here at UT Austin, but I run the Texas Advanced Computing Center, where we build out a lot of the infrastructure, both for the traditional scientific simulation that people like KJ used to use an awful lot of, and probably still uses an awful lot of, and increasingly that's blended with the AI infrastructure that we use. So I think about more of a challenge one, right? What are the impacts on the power grid from AI, and thinking about how it's going to be used, although there's a lot of ways it's going to be used too. So background is a double E, so happy to be here. Thanks.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Kenath Carver. I've done a lot of things, seen a lot of things. Happy to be here at UT Energy Week. Basically, I'm the regulator in the room, so I'm going to bring that flavor for you, and hopefully you'll enjoy it today. Happy to be here. I made it, Mom. Thanks.
And I'm Betsy Soehren Jones. I've spent my entire career in the electric and gas industry. I built one of the very first cybersecurity programs in the country for a large regulated utility. I was at Exelon for almost 20 years. And my role right now, so I'm at a mid-sized consulting firm, and what I do is I work with the executive teams at the electric and gas companies to make determinations as to where it's safe to bring AI into the business units. So let me start actually with that question. So Kenath, this is really for you. From a regulatory perspective, what factors should energy companies emphasize when they're trying to show value and safety when deploying AI within their businesses?
Very thought-provoking question, Betsy. So let me frame your mind just for a moment. Where do I live? Where do I work at? So there's 16 critical infrastructures as defined by DHS. The biggest one is energy, right, which is divided up by oil and gas and electricity. So I live in the electricity world. So electricity, there's a subsector in there, right? So there's the grid, the bulk power system, and then there's the bulk electric system. So just think of the bulk electrical system as the most important, riskiest stuff that's out there, right? So we got to protect it. So the Federal Power Act, through delegation agreements with NERC and FERC, basically allow us to audit cyber, physical security, electrical engineering standards. So putting that frame in mind, I'm going to always be talking about reliability and security of, in here in Texas, the ERCOT interconnection. So with that said, let me give you a little bit of a history lesson. So we got a couple of executive orders that came into play, one in 2023, one in 2024, all geared around, or 2025, excuse me, all geared around AI and the United States kind of taking the charge with AI to make sure it's ethical, unbiased, information has integrity, and also given the United States being a leader with the development of AI with the most recent one. So another thing to keep in mind, there's an annual threat assessment that comes out by the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And one of the things that they identified for 2024 was disruptive technology, that being AI. So it has been identified as a disruptive technology from a weaponization perspective, utilized with obviously cyber attacks, misinformation, suppression of information, and also competitive edge from a global advantage perspective. So think about that just for a minute from a United States perspective, kind of the thoughts on AI is. On top of that, there's been executive orders on zero trust architecture for federal and government that came out a couple of years ago. So AI is part of that equation of implementing zero trust architecture within your environments. So with that said, what are the concerns with AI so we can emphasize how a utility can better position itself? Well, data is the biggest one, right? Data in general, because whether it's pulling from public sources, whether it's pulling internally in your own sources, there's risk called data hallucinations, data poisoning, right? Data poisoning is basically calculating things wrong or giving an assessment wrong or coming out with something that is false. From a hallucination perspective, it's basically giving you false information based on not much of any real resource. And then lastly is privacy is a huge concern. So a lot of this stuff is cloud-based. It goes in the cloud. It's in the public domain, and it keeps learning, and it spits out stuff. So think about your top secret or critical energy infrastructure information, or your PII, and all the different acronyms that are out there. This stuff going into the public domain and what it could be utilized for, right? So for utilities, especially in the energy sector, to leverage AI technology more, they really have to come down to how am I going to implement this in a secure manner, with internal controls in place to reduce risks? How am I going to, at the end of the day, be more efficient and effective from an operational standpoint? And then also, how does the consumer or the customer benefit from the implementation of AI within the organization? So I think that if utilities can emphasize those things, and of course, be compliant with the regulatory standards and requirements, then that's what's gonna really give us the warm and fuzzy for more utilities to move into the AI space and to do so comfortably. Thank you, that's all I gotta say about that.
So what I think Kenath is really expressing is, what are the guardrails? So what are the guardrails that executives need to start thinking through as they're making procurement decisions related to AI? So Dan, if we turn to you, let's think about the legacy IT systems that are already in place today that are now, we're now trying to implement AI into that environment. Can you talk a little bit about how does this actually work? So Kenath told us you got to make sure you're going to do it safely. You're going to hear the things that the regulators are going to want. Okay, now I have all of these legacy IT systems, then what do I do?
Yeah, so spend a lot of money, unfortunately, is going to be the first answer to that. But I think, there's certainly some good news in that from a cybersecurity and compliance perspective, it looks a lot like any other software system. If you're protecting the non-AI based things that are controlling the ebbs and flows and switches through the grid now, and you just drop in an AI replacement for that, the protections are essentially exactly the same. So that part will be easy. The computing demands are obviously much higher, so there's going to have to be a lot of upgrades to those systems. I think the mindset is a little different in how we build trust in it. Some of trust comes from experience, and if you wonder, how is it that we'll ever get consumers to accept AI devices? That ship's kind of sailed, right? I always love the people who think there's nefarious plans for the government to track you, and we figured out how to get every citizen in the country to pay $50 a month so we can track them, voluntarily. The only government information you have to worry is, can they successfully subpoena it from Google, Apple, and Verizon, who know everything about you? But anyway, so some of it will come over time, sort of building up this trust. The other part is just, I think, the fundamental difference, right? Because much like we've always done in modeling, right? AI is still a model, right, of how something works. But it's gone from sort of a rules-based model where we, write code, solved equations, and sort of knew exactly how you got from, step one to step in. It's a statistics-based model where it's throwing a lot of data at it in a very high-dimensional space, and it's sort of a black box as to how it gets to where it is. So there's a lot of work to do in sort of explainable AI, and putting some, most of my simulation cases, like physics-based checks and balances, but there's a set of rules you don't want it to violate right at any given time that you have to put some guardrails around. When it says, it's flying an aircraft, and the smartest thing to do is open up all the doors at 30,000 feet, you have to tell it, no, not a good idea. So but yeah, so we're going to have to understand a little bit more to trust it, particularly in these sort of life-critical applications around, managing the power grid and things like that. I think that will come with time, and it just, as with any legacy system that you have to replace, it's going to be a huge sort of IT modernization effort to get cutting-edge systems in. It is, the vast majority of the AI compute workload at the moment is, training these models and getting them tuned and to work right, which does require access to this data and getting that into secure places where you train on thousands of GPUs. The actual deployed models throughout the grid are probably going to, to do the inference is a lot less infrastructure, but the infrastructure looks a little different, and it's going to all have to be modernized.
So we talked about legacy systems. So KJ, when I think about your company, you're a startup founder. You're trying to bring something to the market. So I think first and foremost, can you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do with your actual software? And then also, what have you learned from trying to deploy AI into the operations from a startup perspective?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do is to, like I said in my introduction, is to fill the gap that I perceive exists between the ones who develop solutions and the ones who have the problem, right? So what I hear a lot when I talk to my customers in the energy industry, and to be honest, I most interact with what you would think about as traditional oil and gas companies, but pretty much every oil and gas company these days are energy companies, so they have a broader mix of in their portfolio. They have a big concern about how do we bring AI into the mix in a way that doesn't throw away the experience that are more math and physics and geoscience focused people have. So what they have seen, partly because of the demographics in the oil and gas industry, a lot of experience is retiring. And then with the whole wave of AI coming in, a lot of the mid-career people left, right? The ones who had an opportunity to go to the AI industry or the tech industry, I guess like myself, we left. So now they're left with this situation where they have a lot of experience that's about to go out the door in retirement, and then have a lot of people who are much less experienced, really smart people, less experienced, and they are in a position where they're going to bring in the AI into the mix. But how do they do that how do they do that in a way that is still sound when it comes to making judgment on the decision that the AI is going to do for you, or in how you apply AI into the decision-making process? So what I'm trying to do is maybe not the classical way of doing AI, where you kind of think about AI as building surrogates for the more physics-based simulations, but more in a sense, how do I speed up those physics-based simulations by using AI within those simulations? So it's more of a predictor-corrector approach. I trust AI to make a good judgment where I should go, but I'll verify with my equations and residuals that it made a good choice. So that way, that goes back to the trust part, right? That way, you trust it the same way you trusted your previous simulation, or not, based on the fact that you're really solving the same set of equations. You're just doing it differently. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on. And even for the surrogates, which are a very popular way of using AI for quick interrogation, a lot of those surrogates are going to learn from simulation models. Not all types of data is easily accessible, either because it's difficult, it's expensive, or it's dangerous. And even for something self-driving cars, right, where you think you can put cameras in every car around, they use simulations as a way to get additional data to train those models. So that's where really getting to the point of speeding up those traditional simulations, both for those simulations on their own, but also for the sake of training those surrogates will be important.
So what I think I'm hearing from the panel is a couple of things. So when you look at the energy industry as a whole, from an AI adoption perspective, they're cautious. So it's going to be different than if you take consumer and industrial products, for example. So if I'm Target or Walmart, I may be quicker to adopt AI because I don't have as many risks from the critical infrastructure perspective of making sure power stays on, oil is flowing. We've got quite a few different legacy systems that are already in place. How do you make the AI actually work within those legacy systems? And then when you have new startups, how do you pressure test the models that are in those different pieces of software to ensure that you understand what you're getting out? So for one second, I would like to pose this question to all of the panelists. I think the other hugely important piece to this is the workforce. So we can have the greatest technology, but do we have the people that are going to be able to pull the value out of each of these business cases for each of these different investments? So I'd love to hear from each of you on just the workforce that you think is going to be needed in order to implement all of these different and new technologies. So Kenath, I'll start with you.
Again, very thought-provoking question. So I'll put it this way, right? So one of the biggest risks in my neck of the woods with utilities in the energy sector is the human performance component. We have operators that are retiring. We're competing with other industries for cyber, physical security personnel, engineers, that sort of thing. So it's really, this is the road show that we do to hit the universities to try to gain more STEM folks. And there's a misconception about the workforce that you have to, my background is cyber physical security, but there's a misconception that you have to have a degree in it, that you had to have X amount of experience doing this work to do the work. Where we're really at right now as an industry is, do you have the ability to learn, retain, and share knowledge and work with a group? Make sound and professional judgment calls. That's kind of where we're at now. If you can do that, you can be trained to do anything. But with that said, that doesn't mean with time you have to have the experience. If you're think about an operator that's sitting there that has to do a real-time decision on the grid, right? Someone who's been there a year versus someone who's been there 25 years, and knowing the conditions and knowing what to do, that's outside of your standard operating procedure in a book, right? So that's the challenge. So at the end of the day, we need more students, we need more people in general to kind of get into these fields because the gap is widening over time.
Yeah, it's a very wide-ranging answer there. I think there's, there's an estimate that AI is going to impact about half of jobs. That might actually be a little low, but not all of those people are going to become experts in generating AI, right, to your point, right? And so I think there's sort of three classes of people we need to focus on here. One is the people who are actually developing new methodology and better AI over time, the sort of core AI research, right? Mostly out of engineering, computer science, and people who've fallen in. And by the way, to your point, right, since there was, maybe 12 years ago, there was basically no demand for AI. So of all the people working in it now, the number of people who are actually trained with, let's just say there's AI on a lot more resumes than there are degrees in AI out there by a factor of, 1,000. So because, And I always laugh at companies saying, we're going to hire 10,000 PhDs in AI. And I'm like, well, that's more than there are, so good luck. You're going to hire 10,000 AI-adjacent PhDs. I mean, I retrained a bunch of physicists on this. They can learn this stuff if you work hard enough with them. But I think the second group is going to be people who know the problem space and can learn enough about AI to adapt it properly, right? So in the surrogate model example that KJ brought up, you're not going to do new reservoir models and replace your physics-based reservoir model if you're an oil and gas company with an AI black box that's been adapted by somebody who doesn't know anything about the problem space, right? So there's going to be people who know how to work with AI models, tune and adapt them, and assign them in their role. And then there's the people like operators whose jobs are just going to be impacted by them, right? Where AI is making very fast decisions, but there's, still going to be a human somewhere supervising all that, right? And how do they change sort of their workflow and their process to be augmented by AI, be more productive? But they're going to have to look at AI outputs. They're going to have to understand what its limits are. They're going to have to understand when it's wrong, right? Which again is much the same challenge of supervising humans. Is understanding what they're good at and understanding when they're wrong, and how you deal with that in ways that don't irritate them overly much. And when you have to irritate them overly much. So we're really going to have these three groups, all of which require a certain degree of AI literacy, but not all are going to be computer scientists doing AI. In fact, that'll be the tiny minority of them will be that. So, but it is a broad-based problem. And I'd be remiss, and did this in the other panel, so I'm going to do it again, right? One of the big challenges we're going to face in the sort of back to the regulatory side of things is the ongoing efforts to, remove access to AI technologies from the majority of our graduate students in STEM fields right now due to some legit concerns about technology leaking out of the country and, access to export-controlled resources. But at the same time, we do not have the domestic resources to produce enough people or the domestic interest to produce enough people to do this. And if we get rid of all of our foreign national grad students, we're going to have a huge, if you think we're having trouble hiring AI people now, get rid of all the grad students and then try again, particularly when they're all in other countries competing against us. So.
Well, I don't know if I have too much to add. I think you've, both Kenath and Dan have said kind of what I want to say. But what I may do is just to give you an illustration through some of the conversations I've had with a couple of service companies. And service companies are particularly focused on things that building stuff, right? So they're going to help build platforms. They're going to build chemical plants. They're going to essentially have a lot of engineers that do hands-on things, and they're going to also provide a lot of instrumentation, right, in those wells. So this is an area where there's a rich amount of data. So it's very convenient, promising for AI. There's a lot of data to consume, and you can have it help help you do a better job as you operate the equipment. And one of the service companies I talked to, they said that historically they've had two major types of people, right? They've had engineers, obviously, the ones who are out there doing the work. The second largest group has been the geoscientists. And then they've had, IT people and so on, right? But there's been a big shift recently, in part because of energy transition, which is making a lot of oil companies downplay the geoscience part more than they have historically, but also because of AI, right? So now they have the second largest group and growing are just data scientists. But what they said is that their strong preference would have been to have engineers who know how to use data science, but they just can't find it. So they are kind of choosing the second best option, and it's to hire people who have like more of a pure data science background and trying to, I guess, through diffusion or osmosis, get enough engineering in there that you can use those tools responsibly. But it's challenging for them. And they hope and they anticipate that over time, AI, and I agree with them, AI will be part of the toolbox for a lot of different professions, and in particular, people who work in engineering fields.
And I know we only have a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to flip really quick back to the energy consumption. So it's said right now that for every AI search that you do, it uses 9 times more electricity than a normal Google search. And so when we are starting to think through just the energy usage that we are going to need to power all of this, it's monumental. We've started to see things happen where you've got Microsoft signing a 20-year agreement with a nuclear power plant where they're hooking up the data center directly to the nuclear power plant. That's unprecedented to have one customer for an entire nuclear reactor. Same is true in Michigan. So that happened in New York. Michigan has also seen a very similar deal. And now we're starting to see it here in Texas, those discussions starting to happen in Texas. So one of the things that I do want to leave this audience with is thinking through, as much as we're pushing the technology, there also has to be an equal counterbalance conversation that's happening on being able to power all of it. So we can have these great technologies, but somebody's got to make the power. So when you hear those discussions and you see them on the front page, I'd really urge you to understand that other piece of things is there's only so much power we can make in the country right now as quick as we're building the AI data centers. So it really is going to take a whole new set of technologies that are going to have to be deployed really on site at where those data centers are living. And that's a huge piece of what I'm working on, what Kenath is working on, et cetera. So hopefully this was a great panel for all of you. And thank you so much to UT for the opportunity for all of us to be here today. Thank you.